Welcome to Lesson 8 in the WPF with MVVM add-on course. In this lesson, we're going to work on the Create Tournament form. Now we've got the major pieces in place, this lesson will mostly be about connecting all of them together. So let's jump right in right now. Over here in our Tracker UI, let's open up the Create Tournament form so we can see what we're going to attempt to do. Now remember that this form we talked about at the beginning of this course. We're going to reimagine how this form lays out in order to take advantage of our user control forms. And by that I mean we're going to have our tournament name and entry fee over here, but then in this column right here, we'll have our team information, meaning we'll have our select team, our add team, our remove selected team, and our create team. And we'll have our team list box. If we create a team, we're going to replace this section with our create new team form, just like we did with the person form in the create team form. So it's a Now this is our first little bit of complexity because so far we've done where we said conductor, control dot, and we said object, and that's it. And it's one object or one child form per form, which works fine in our cases so far. But on this page, if we look at this design view of our win form, we're going to want to have possibly a create team form open and a create prize form open. Now you might say, well, that's silly. We wouldn't have two open at the same time. And that may be true. But think back to how we name our content control, which is our place where the child form goes. We name it active item. Well, what if we want an active item over here and next time we want to have an active item over here? You know, prize versus player. So that's a problem because we need to have the same control in two places with the same name. Now we could do some binding and that might work, but really this is the case where we have a different type of conductor. And it's a great time to show it off. So what we say is dot collection, meaning we're going to have more than one child form on this form. Now you have two options under here, all active or one active. The difference is pretty obvious, but if one active is selected, you can only have one child view active at a time, but you can keep multiple child views on your form deactive but still there. And that's not really what I want for this application. Instead, I want all active, meaning all of these can be active at a time. Actually, all of them will be active at a time. So that's what I want is conductor object.collection all active, meaning we're going to have multiple items on this page, and when we open them up, we're going to add it to the collection and it will be active right away. When we close a form, a child form, it'll get removed from the collection. So there'll be a little bit have a couple differences in here as far as how we deal with the active item, but really it isn't that difficult to navigate. So that's the first little hurdle we have to go through with creating a tournament model, view model. But that's all set now. Let's create the create tournament view. So right click and say add user control, create tournament view. Shrink this down to 100%. There we go. That's a little more reasonable. Let's fit it. There we go. And I'll also set the height to be 500 just to give me a little more screen real estate to work with. Now on this form, remember I said I want 3 columns. So let's do that now. So add these column definitions. And I'll say the width for each is auto. I'll add 3 of these, and the last one I'll set as so grid.row definitions. Height is auto. And I'll copy that for 4 rows. The last one being star. Now remember, I don't have to put my border columns and border rows on here with those widths of 20 because this is a user control and I want to handle those borders at the parent level, not at the user control level. So this should be all set. Now let's add the very top. We'll put this on row 0. We're going to say text block. And really all this is, we're going to say font size is 28. And that's it for properties for right now. And we'll say create tournament. So that's our create tournament header. Now we do want to center this and want to put in the right row and column. So grid.row equals 0. Grid.column equals 0. Grid.column span. Let's span all 3 columns. And now we can say that the horizontal alignment equals center. There you go. There's our header. Don't forget we're shrunk down to 73%. So this is actually bigger than it appears. Now the other thing to think about is, do we give some space at the very top to kind of move us down just a little bit? And while a temptation is there, I'm going to say no. Because again, we're going to let the parent handle the margins for this, the padding. So there's row 0. We've got our create tournament. like we have here. Now we need to create our 3 columns and put values in them. So let's do that next. We'll say row 1. And let's put 3 stack panels. Orientation is vertical. We're going to start off with grid.row is row 1. And grid.column is column 0. There's our first stack panel. We'll do this 2 more times. There we are. I'll actually put a little separation there. And grid row is 2. I'm sorry. Row is 1. Column is now 1. And column is 2. So there's our 3 stack panels, right in order. This first one is going to be our tournament name, our entry fee, and that's it. Well, at least for now. Maybe we'll add more cool stuff later, but at least for now, it's all we're going to have. So let's go look for a form that already has that in place, that kind of layout. Let's look at the Create Team view, and that has them above. So let's take this one right here, this right here. So text block and text box. So we're going to take this and copy it. And now we'll paste it in this stack panel and just change the names. So this is going to be tournament name. So we'll go here and say tournament name. And we'll change the name to be tournament name. There we go. And now that's on the form. That looks small, but looks good. And we have our padding on both sides for the 5 to kind of indent inside of any header, which is fine. So leave that as is. Now what we need to do is we need to add one more for the entry fee. And we're going to stack this on top just to keep consistent. So let's do the same thing. We're going to copy this. We'll paste it below. We'll call this entry fee. And again, the name will be entry fee. And if you want to zoom in to what's going to look at 100%, we can do that. Still kind of tiny, but don't forget we're using the default font size, which I believe is 12. But when we put it inside our form, it'll be bigger than that. In fact, let's go to our shell view model and change this. Instead of create team view model, we're going to say create tournament view model so we can see it right away. And in fact, let's run it. I always love a test as soon as possible just to make sure I'm on the right track. And that looks right. I mean, we've got our tournament name and entry fee. It sounds reasonable at least. So you have tournament tracker, create tournament. We'll definitely put some kind of padding here, or margin actually, to move this in. And we'll probably put the background to be a little bit gray or something, some kind of well to indicate that this is its own section, which will delimit it nicely, I think. But for right now, this works. we have our drop down. We don't need our team name. We have our drop down, 3 buttons, a list box, and it actually swaps out for a new form, which is exactly what we want. So let's grab everything from here down. So from text box on down through the button. So let's grab all of that. Now, I don't think we need to create team button, so let's go up one. We're not actually creating anything on this. We're just selecting, hitting create new to swap out this for the new form. We're adding and removing. The create will come down at the total bottom of the form for create tournament. So we just need from here down to here. So we've got all that. Let's close this out. We'll come back to our view. We're going to paste it into this stack panel. Now that's a lot of pasting in, so you gotta be very careful to modify this properly. So let's start at the very top and work our way down methodically, changing everything necessary. So for example, select team member is now select team. Next, instead of available team members, it's available teams. It will have selected team to add. It's one way of source. And we'll use, instead of full name, it's team name. Next, we're going to have add, not member, but add team. We're going to say add team over here. Don't forget these. Then we're going to have create team. I can actually copy and paste this. Remove team. So those are the 3 buttons. Next, we're going to have our selected team is visible. Actually, selected teams, that's plural. Selected teams is visible. That's this list box of the teams we've picked. That's what we want. And selected teams in our text box, or text block, then selected teams, and it's team name, and selected team to remove. And that's a 2-way. So far, so good. Now we go down here and say add team is visible. And instead of active item, we have to change this since we don't have one active item. So we're going to call this active add team view. This way we know that the user control applies to the active add team view. So that's all that goes into this middle section right here. Now we need to handle the right-hand section, which is our add prize or select prize. And in fact, we don't have a drop-down for select prize. Notice down here, there's no drop-down. So it's just create prize or remove prize and the prize list. So it's very, very similar to what we have here. It's just that we don't have these first 2 with a select prize and the select prize drop down. So we'll actually start from here. We're going to copy just like this. And we'll paste it in here. And it's going to yell at us about a lot of stuff, and that's okay. Because all of our names need to be changed. That's great. We actually want that. So let's start with our add team. It should be, we don't need an add team. We just need a create team. But I'm actually going to take the create team out. And the reason why is because these 2 have the margins, whereas the middle one doesn't have any margins. So let's take that one out. I have to change it anyways. Create prize. And this is create prize. And then remove prize. And remove prize. Notice nothing's showing up yet. That's because we've got too many errors. Once we have 0 errors, then it will show everything. So now selected prizes. Selected prizes is visible. And we have selected prizes. I actually skipped one, shouldn't do that. Selected prizes. And the display member, instead of selected our team name, we have, I believe it's prize name. We can verify that in just a minute. And then we have selected prize to remove. And that binds 2 ways. And this is selected prizes, that's right. Next one down, add prize is visible. And active add prize view. There we go. Now we can see that we actually have, was over a little bit, we actually have all 3 of our sections in place. Now they're all bumped up against each other. That's kind of ugly. We'll take care of that since these are children of this form. Therefore, this is the parent for them. Therefore, we put the padding on and the margins on. I think the easiest way of doing that will be to attach the margins to the stack panels. But first I want to address that it looks like create prize buttons are above selected team. I don't think they are. Now that you see the grid, we take the grid off, it looks kind of ugly. And I think the solution for that is actually going to coincide with the fact that we don't have headers like we have here. Over here we just have a section. I kind of want to have a header here that said this is the team section and this is the prize section. So let's do that first, and then we'll deal with if this doesn't look like it's aligned correctly. So we can put another text block at the very top. And we're going to give this a font size of, let's go with 24. It's a little bigger, but it's not as big as our create tournament, which is 28. So font size, and for right now, we'll leave it that as is, and we'll say teams section. That's a little big. It's a little bit bold. Let's make that more like 20. And you know what? We probably should make it 22 because it looks huge, but the reality is when the rest of this font size goes to 18, it won't look quite as big. So there's a team section. And we can copy that and paste it down below and say the prizes section. And now hopefully that will look a little more aligned. It seems to. It does kind of separate this out on its own. It doesn't really have a header for it. I'm not sure we need to give it a header, but this seems to work. So now let's put some margins around our 3 stack panels. Stack panel 1, I'll say margin, and I just want margin on the top and the right and the bottom. I don't want to worry about the left because the left will come from our parent. So we'll start off with 0, and we'll say the top gets a margin of 10, and the right gets a margin of 10, and the bottom gets a margin of 10. That puts a little space there between everything. Next, we'll move down to the team section. We'll say margin equals, I don't want anything on the left or right, just 10 for the top and bottom. So 0 for left and right, 10 for top and bottom. And then this final one, I want to say margin equals, I want 10 on the left, 10 up top, 0 on the right, and 10 at the bottom. And now that's a little more separated. Let's come down here. That's a little more separated into 3 distinct sections. if you wanted to, you could put a line here between the two, some kind of separator line, or put a border or something like that. But I think this is good enough. Now, I'm kind of bothered by this not having a header. So let's actually put one here. This is ticky-tacky little stuff. It's not anything you have to have. It's just, I kind of like symmetry. And so far it's not symmetrical. So this will be general info. So now we have 3 sections, 3 headers, general info, team section, and prizes section. And there's our information on each. That looks good. Now we can do is add our button at the bottom. So this is all in row 1. So now we go to row 2. And we're going to say, this doesn't need a stack panel. It just needs a button. Or at least it doesn't for right now. x:name equals create tournament. And for right now, let's just say create tournament. So you can see it. And now let's go back and modify it for where it is in the row and column. So grid.row is row 2. And grid.column is column 0. But I want to span it across all 3 columns. So therefore grid.column span is 3. That makes it huge, which is okay. But then I want to have a padding of at least 10 all around. And let's give it some margins as well. Let's give it margins of, let's still do zeros around the left and right, but we'll do a margin at the bottom. So 0 for left and right, actually for 0 for left, 0 for top, 0 for right, and 10 for the bottom. That way make sure we have 10 pixels before the bottom of our form, or bottom of our row. Now that looks okay. Let's start it up and see how it looks in our form and see how it adjusts based on that font size. We have to make our starting form a little bigger, but there we go. That's not bad. It's right now it looks kind of ugly. There's nothing filled in and it's all crunched up with everything else. But once we put some padding around this, or actually margin around this, and maybe change the back color to something a little more distinctive, I think it's going to be a good start. All right, so let's go ahead and turn our attention towards wiring this up. And boy, it flopped it around again. Now to wire all this up, there's a lot here. And I'm actually going to cheat. I'm going to tell you I'm cheating just because if you're working at home, you can do this too. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to drag this out into its own window. Now I have a new window just for create tournament view, the create tournament view. I'm going to drag this onto a different monitor. Now I can look at it while I adjust the create tournament view model. Now you may see how is that cheating? Well, I try and do everything on screen if possible. But the reality is I really need to see all these properties to make sure I get them all. And I need to make sure I see all the buttons so I get all those methods. And the best way of doing that is putting it on a different monitor instead of switching back and forth between the two. So if you have 2 monitors, and I really encourage you, if you are able, get a second monitor. If you have 2 monitors, then you can easily swap back and forth. Now, Windows, I believe from Windows 7 up, maybe Vista up, has the idea of snapping to sides of the screen, which you can do. The problem is that with our WPF views, we're already splitting the screen in half because we have half for the XAML and half for the rendered view. And I kind of like to see both, which means that then you're really running out of room to put any other code anywhere else. So that's what I'm doing. So if you see my mouse go off screen or if I say, okay, there's this, it's not from memory. I'm just reading from a screen above the screen that we're on right now. All right, so I need to create some properties. Let's start with prop full. And this is going to be string underscore tournament name. And I'll add my notify of change. There we go. There's our first property. Next, we have our entry fee, and that's of type decimal because it's a monetary value. And I'll move this to the top. I'll actually collapse this down, and I will modify this so I also have the notify of property change. And that's that property. So now we have all the general info taken care of. Now we need to work on the teams section. And that'll be a bindable collection. And that's of type team model, I believe. We'll fix that in a minute. Don't worry about changing that. We can change it later. And we'll say that the name of this is underscore available teams. So let's change this to team model, control dot, add the tracker library dot models. That brings that in. And we'll have to change it down here as well to match up now. So now we have that. We can drag this up to the top. We can get rid of that extra space. And we can set this to, actually we don't need to notify a property change. So we're good here. Now, anytime you have a bindable collection, you should probably have a selected item. So in this case, we have selected team to add. So that's a prop full. That's type team model. And this is selected team to add. And we can drag this up to the top. And we can add the notify here. There we go. We can collapse this down. So this is our select team dropdown. So it has the available teams and then which one you selected. And now we're going to have another bindable collection. This is a bindable collection of type team model. And this is going to be our list box of which ones are selected. Selected teams. So that's selected teams. We can drag up our private backing field. We can expand out our set so we can add the notify. We can shrink this down. We can add our property like this one. So And it'll probably still happen, but I try hard not to by keeping this routine. All right, so now we've handled the teams dropdown. And this last one's a bit different. In the past, even if we've had a child form, it's been bound to the active item. And so we never actually created a property in the view model to hold our form. But now, since we have two forms, our create teams or our list teams and our create prizes, those forms have to live somewhere. In this case, we're going to create a property for them. So we're going to call this a type screen. Now, technically they're conductors, but a conductor is a type of screen. So I think this should work, but if it doesn't, we'll come back and change this. But let's leave it at screen for now. And we'll say that this name is active add team view. All right, so now that has been added, and we'll still do a notify property change whenever this is set. I'm not sure we'll need this, but it's better to have it and not need it. So there we go. There is all the items we're going to need for our teams section, at least in terms of properties. Now, I didn't move this up. I should do that before I forget. Let's move on to the prizes section for the prizes properties. This one's fairly simple. We're going to need to have a prop full, and this will be a bindable collection of type prize model. We're going to call this the private backing field to the top. We can change our set, and we'll modify or add our notify of property change. And now that's done. The last property for the page will be our active add prize view, which is of type screen, or at least I think it is. So type screen, and this is our active add prize view. And that should be a lowercase a. I'll get to that in a minute. Let's actually do it right now. Active add prize view. There we go. Now I can modify our set. Actually, before I modify my set, I'm going to drag this to the top. For me, and this is me personally, order is important because it keeps things together. I always do things the same way. I always get the same results, or mostly. Every once in a while I mess something up. There we go. So now you're notified of the property change for our screen. And that's all the properties for our create tournament view. Now we can go on to all of our methods. let's start with the team section. So public void add team. And since you can't add team if there's not one selected, we're going to say public bool add or can add team. And this should be pretty simple to implement. We just return, and then we'll say we're looking for the selected team to add. So return selected team to add is not equal null. So as long as you selected a team, you can go ahead and add that team. So that's done, which I like done, so I can check that off my list. Now let's add a method for our create team. And there is no can method for this because you can always create a new team. So we'll leave that alone. I'm also leaving it open because that indicates to me I have to do something yet with them. Now I may have to go back and add stuff to these things up here, but they seem to be set for right now. I don't know of anything else I need to add, so I'll leave those collapsed. Whereas these, I know I need to do something. Next, I have my remove team. And I'll actually do my bool first, can remove team. And that should return, and we scroll up here, we'll see selected team to remove. So selected team to remove is not equal to null. Then you can remove something. And then we can collapse that. And then we have our public void remove team, which will actually remove the team from the list. And the add team and remove team will be similar, but like I said, we'll wait on doing those. Now we need to wire up our create prize. So public void create prize method. And there isn't going to be a corresponding can create prize because you can always create a prize. So we'll leave that open. And then public bool can remove prize. And so we're going to say return selected prize to remove is not equal to null. We'll collapse that down and add our corresponding method for this. Public void remove prize. And there we go. So now I have the remove prize button. The only other button we have in the entire form, and this is kind of fun, public void create tournament. Now we do need a can create tournament as well for this, but this will be a little bit more complicated. Public bool can create tournament. And for right now, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to put to do here. And return true. What that does is it always enables my button for testing, but I want to know to come back here and modify this to actually put the logic in. I could just not even include this method, but I really want that shell there so I know I need to do this. Now at this point, we have all of our properties, we have all of our methods, including the methods that enable or disable buttons. So now what we need to do is wire up our form and we're good to go. Now it's a little more work than just that, but we really have set ourselves up to just plug things in and go. And that's a job for part 2 of this Create Tournament lesson. So it's actually our next lesson will be to wire all of this up so that our Create Tournament form actually functions.